Hey, y'all. Welcome to Scary Movie Sunday, a podcast where we watch horror content and talk about it. We've always liked all things horror, video games, movies, short stories, and love talking about them afterwards and dissecting them. So thought that we would put our thoughts out there and broaden the conversation and see who else wanted to join in.
So what would you say is the overall theme or goal that we're trying to achieve with Scary Movie Sunday?
Man, for me, I just want to have an excuse to consume more horror media. And then also, I've really been enjoying lately critiquing the media that I'm consuming and kind of picking it apart, looking for the deeper meaning. So it's easier for me to do that when I'm having a conversation about it.
Well, for me, it's falls into the vein of toxic masculinity of course I know a better way to do it, and I love spotlighting the things that come across as fun. Of course I'm kidding, but I love there to be a sense of realism. I love there to be a sense of rules, and I love rewarding and feeling rewarded by following along and being able to have different elements of the plot come together in a certain way and try to hopefully predict the outcome and see what's going to happen and have fun with how the characters are going to bounce off of each other.
Man, I just like being scared. And my favorite thing is definitely a paranormal story. Give me a good ghosty or a demon that can get my imagination running wild. I'm not as scared as of the real world things, the slashers or the real world killers. I like the paranormal edge to it.
Yeah, I think I tend to lean into movies that have maybe a demonic entity, but somehow still manage to actually follow certain playbook rules. So one of my all-time favorites would be The Descent. It's very much a mythical creature that we've never discovered before, nobody knows about, but it very much has to follow by certain rule sets. So it has a huge advantage of it's in the darkness and it has adapted to that. It can climb exceptionally well. And of course, us as humans, we're blind. We can't climb exceptionally well, and we're at a huge disadvantage. And the utter terror of the darkness being one of the main enemies. And those types of films that set the ground rules for us and adhere to them, that I love that.
You know, I actually just saw I don't know if it was on Tumblr or Reddit, forgive me for that, but a theory related to caves and people that are just drawn underground, speaking of The Descent. And it was that, the fungus that gets into ants,
Yeah.
and it makes them climb up on the grass. So they'll get eaten by a cow or a sheep. And then that's where that fungus, that organism really wants to be. So it was this really wild theory that something has gotten into the brains of these people that is driving them underground, maybe right into the waiting mouths of the creatures from The Descent.
Maybe.
Could be.
Could be.
Might be. So I was going to ask you your favorite. You beat me to it. I think my favorite, and it's going to change all the time, but what I'm consistently drawn to is the remake of Evil Dead, the 2013 version. I think some people didn't like it because it went away so far from the campiness of the original Evil Dead movies. And in like Evil Dead Rise, they went back to that camp. But I loved the raw, evil that they went into with that 2013 version. What I really enjoyed, again, kind of going into themes and all that, was, and maybe I like it because it was so in your face, but the parallel of addiction that they went through, and you're watching this person struggle through demons, real and paranormal, and the way that it could destroy the people around her at the same time. I really enjoyed it. And also, it just scared the bejesus out of me. Man, when I saw that, I think I stayed up probably all night just trying to distract myself because I didn't want to try to settle down and go to sleep. It really stuck with me.
So what film you got for us today?
So today we were going to be going over Night of the Living Dead, which is the 1968 George A. Romero film, a classic. And one of the reasons that we decided to watch it is, though it's a classic, I had never seen it. When had you seen it before?
Probably saw it about 20 years ago. I believe at the time they had done a remake of Night of the Living Dead. I think George A. Romero had actually done it as well. And I enjoyed it enough that I want to just kind of see what the origin of this was. This really kicked off and set the tone for a lot of zombie films that were going to come in the future, or even a lot of monster films that were going to come in the future. And the thing that stood out to me the most is they already had something very unique in the monsters, but there were other types of monsters at play as we went on, and it really set the genre for the next we're 5, 6, 7 decades moving forward, and it's still setting the tone for where we're going.
So just a brief overview, man, there, spoilers ahead. So if anyone hasn't seen this film and thinks they're going to, go away, go watch it, and then come back and hang out with us as we talk through it. That being said, high level overview. We start out with Barbara and Johnny, their siblings. They've gone to the cemetery to leave some flowers on a grave of a family member. They're doing it for their mom, and they kind of have this classic sibling banter going on. And right away, and side note, this is what I love about older films, is they do not pussyfoot around. They just go right into the plot. I think sometimes with modern films, we feel like we have to build up so much and give so much story. But this was just like, hey, you're in a cemetery. The brother starts really messing with Barbara and spooking her. And, oh, it's a spooky, spooky cemetery. And the next thing you know, this gentleman that had just been coming by attacks. And this is our first look at the living dead. Attacks Barbara. Johnny comes in to save her, and she runs. She tries to get away in the car. That doesn't work. She gets out, runs again, and finds this little farmhouse. And that's where we're going to stay for the rest of the film, is in this little farmhouse. So she kind of barricades herself in. And then we find our next, I would say really the main character of the story is Ben. And he rolls up in this truck and he gets inside and starts to help her barricade. But Barbara at this point is practically catatonic. So he barricades up the house. We find out through the radio that this is just something that's happening throughout the country, that the dead have risen. And
so hang on one second, because this film,
Sure.
being set in 1968, has a very important quality. So Ben possesses a very important trait for this entire film, on how he's perceived, how he's taken, and ultimately what the bigger theme of the movie is. What is that? Ben is an African American.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was staring at you going, theme. Gosh, you're putting me on the spot here. I'm going to be like, it's race relations. And someone else is going to come in the comments and be like, that's not at all. So yeah, I guess important to note, you got starting from the beginning that Barbara and Johnny are white. Everyone in this film that we see is white, but Ben coming in is a black man. And I remember, I hadn't even seen a poster, or at least that I remembered, of this film. And I remember as soon as he came on screen looking at you and going, I had no idea. I am shocked that a main character in this film is black at that time. And you're right, it does play a big role throughout. So he does take charge. We find out that, yeah, this is happening across the country. He's trying to come up with some plan. She's not super helpful. And then, shocker, there have been people hiding in the basement of this home the whole time. And they unlock the door, they come out. And now, as you mentioned, we are fighting a battle on two fronts, because now we've got many a ghoul outside, desperate to get in. And within the home, we now have this other man who desperately wants to take charge, and he wants to take charge away from Ben. This is Harry. I'm checking my Wikipedia here to make sure that I don't say anything wrong. Yes. Harry. So we've got Harry, we have his wife and his young daughter who's been injured. She was injured in the original attack. And then there's also a young couple, Tom and Judy, and they're just wanting to survive. Harry really wants everyone to stay in the cellar. Ben says, no, thank you. We can better defend and know what's going on if we're up here. We've got our supplies. And so there's, for the rest of the movie, this power struggle between those two. Ultimately, a few daring attempts to get the car up and running, to get gas, end in disaster. And the characters begin to slowly die off one by one. So first we lose Tom and Judy in a horrific explosion at the truck. Ben makes it back into the house, but at this point, the daughter, who we know from our modern viewing that if she was injured, she must be infected, and she was. So she attacks her mother, who succumbs, and then Harry ends up trying to take the gun away from Ben. He also does not help him get back in the house after he went out with Tom and Judy. So in retribution, for revenge, Ben then ends up shooting Harry. So we're left with only Ben alive. He manages to wait out down in the cellar, locked away, wait out the night. And again, spoilers, if anyone's been listening this long, I really don't want to ruin the ending for you. So run away if you don't want spoilers. But in the end, the sun has risen and a search and rescue party is going through, sweeping the fields, shooting any of the infected. You see them get to the house. You have a breath of relief as Ben climbs out of the cellar. And this, I say, search and rescue party gets Ben in their sights and shoots him point blank in the head. And the movie ends with them dragging his body along with the infected into a burn pile.
Not quite point blank. I mean, they were 50 feet away. Point blank insinuates you're standing toe to toe.
Oh, so forgive me.
There was some distance. They shot him through a window that was boarded up.
They sure did. I learning terms, point blank, to me, I took that to mean like
dead shot.
One shot and you're dead. So yeah, rifle scope right to the noggin. That's what they did, right to the noggin. And again, having never seen it, shock, because I was sure they were there to save him.
Well, the part that we're leaving out, and the reason why that ending doesn't come across so much as an accident, is along the film, they had been cutting away to a specific newscaster who was out in the field with that search and rescue party. And they had made comments along the way of sweeping and clearing and just basically shooting the zombies, I'm going to call them zombies, throughout the night and clearing different areas. And they had even made a specific reference to they had come to a specific shed, and they ended up saying that they cleared it out and there were no survivors, hinting at ultimately what the finish was going to be. So the darker insinuation here is that the gentleman that looked through the rifle and saw him in the window looked down the barrel and saw a black man and decided, 1968, I'm going to clear the house. So he drops him. That was something that stood out to me so much whenever I first watched the film. Just the realization that the main character is a black man. In 1968, that was not so super common. This ends up being a legendary film that we're still going back to. For them to be willing to give him that role, they intentionally made him the most valuable player throughout the film. As soon as they barricade inside the home, he is finding every tool, every piece of wood, anything at his disposal to start boarding up the home. He's throwing furniture out the door and lighting it on fire because they've discovered that the zombies are scared or not wanting to come anywhere near the fire.
They don't like light.
Yeah, he had taken a truck and driven it to the farmhouse, which we end up learning he doesn't even know how to drive a truck. that was a plot point of why the other two ended up passing away, is because they were going to go buy a local fuel station that was on the farm. And so they had to find somebody that knew how to drive a truck. So the two of them went out there to fill it up, and they end up perishing as a result. So he went from being just a random person in this countryside to acquiring a truck, making his way to the house, coming in, seeing a catatonic, white woman who's just sitting there not really doing anything, and he just immediately starts taking charge, boarding up the house, trying to make it as safe as he can, starts coming up with every plan he can think of, starts securing everything, getting the radio online, trying to understand. So they really, not just in the early moments of the film, but all throughout the film, they made him the most intelligent, most cool, calm, collected character throughout the entire film, to just highlight the disparities and then to just really drive it home whenever they effectively assassinate him at the end.
So to give credit, the actor for Ben is Dwayne Jones, and Wikipedia here as a source, so asterisks here, but I'm curious your thoughts, because reading here, the casting was potentially controversial in 1968 when it was rare for a black man to be cast as the hero of an American film. Romero said that Jones performed the best in his audition. This is implying to me that Romero wasn't necessarily intending to cast a black actor, and that's just the way it ended up. What a shift in meaning if that is true. Because it really does change the entire theme to have that one black actor in the cast. And interesting to me, if you take it from his perspective as well, of him being the main character, then this, is all happening to him, and we look at it through his eyes. Even the ghouls themselves could be taken in a different way, that almost, dead or alive, every living or undead being around me is a danger, is something that I'm going to have to be aware of and act a certain way to survive. Whereas if that was a white actor, then it takes it more into just ghouly versus human. What a different film it would have been if it had been a different actor.
Yeah, and I think they also made a real clear point to define the characters as their approaches to the problem just being so varied. You had the starting character of the two siblings. She comes out, and after the first encounter where she was cool-headed enough to escape effectively and find a farmhouse, she goes full catatonic. Mm-hmm. So she just completely breaks down. Then you have Ben, who goes into hyper action mode, and he just starts doing everything he needs to do to ensure the best possible survival. We end up having the guests downstairs that are the two male, an older gentleman and a younger man, and two females, again, older woman and younger woman, and then their daughter. The two men were very much completely unique in that the older gentleman was just an absolute coward, top to bottom. All he wanted to do was hide. All he wanted to do was lock down, which, hindsight, maybe not the worst strategy in the world, given what we know now. But you also have the younger man who is trying to show the elder respect and follow in his footsteps and do what he says, but ultimately is caught between listening to this elder who's an absolute coward and only looking out for himself, and working with Ben, who has done everything within his power to try to protect them. And he's got to make a choice between, do I want to be a coward or do I want to be active and try to ensure my survival through my own hands? Ultimately, he ends up siding with Ben and tries to play the hero. He volunteers that he's going to be the one that drive the truck, go get fuel in it, and they're all going to try to drive away. Ultimately, they have a mishap with fuel, mishap with zombies, and kaboom, the entire truck lights up. Him and his girlfriend both perish as a result. The women both, I would say, played more of a supporting role. They were looking after the catatonic woman. They were looking after the daughter, who effectively for the entire film was laying asleep in the basement. locked up until she wasn't. But they did a really good job of setting the tone of completely different backgrounds, completely different emergency response personalities put in this scenario. And not only do they have to work towards their own survival, who do they defer to? What actions do they take on themselves? But ultimately, we end up seeing how they interplay with each other. I would say even the spouse of the coward, as much as she wanted to follow her husband's judgment, she eventually came to a point where she's like, absolutely not. I am not following you. I am not locking myself down in this death cellar. And she started doing anything that she could to emotionally work with everybody to get everybody on Ben's page.
That's so funny because as a woman, I saw from the beginning with her that she was fed up with her husband. She knew all of his faults, and that was definitely coming through. I feel like we could, both of us, walk through this step by step and describe literally everything that happens in this movie. But maybe can I just ask, what were your favorite parts? If you could, name 3. What sticks in your brain is like, I really liked this part of the movie.
Absolutely, the undertone of the search party with the news group before we get to this is long before the finale when we see them eventually take out Ben. But when they're just simply describing their actions, it's almost a casual, we've been there, done that 10,000 times, is a sport to it of, yeah, no big deal. I just put it into the lane, went into the paint and did a layup. Yeah, no big deal. We just go through here. We just shoot, bang, bang, bang. If you can, put up one in their head. That seems to work the best. He's just so casual and laissez-faire about the whole thing. Everybody's just excited to pull their guns out of their closets and walk through the countryside shooting people. And the way that he's just so unapologetic about this is an uncomfortable situation. A lot of people are going to be under stress listening to this. He doesn't care. He's like, yeah, I'm a badass. We're going to do this on the daily. If this is life forever, no big deal. I got more ammo in the truck. Combining that entire theme of his not really caring and kind of enjoying the moment with that first time when they cleared out a shed and they basically wiped everyone out inside. There were no survivors. There is a tone in his voice that when he describes it, it perks your ears and like, wait a minute. Something about that felt a little off.
Perked yours. I did not. I was just over there going, sure, yes, gentlemen, there were no survivors. It did not click for me. I definitely was, I think, the target audience, just going along for the ride on that one and being utterly shocked at the end.
Yeah. Outside of that, I have to say that the respect that they pay to the actors, there's such a normal cliche that when you get into these settings, you have the trope of the absolute morons that do everything wrong. And in this setting, they gave Ben basically the powerhouse mind of, I'm going to do everything right, or as close to it as I can, within reason. And you always paint yourself in the same scenario that the actors are in, and you say, oh, what would I do in this scenario? I can say with a reasonable level of confidence that Ben did a better job than what I would have come up with. The only comments I would have had to been more aligned to how do we separate the first floor from the second floor and try to use that as a tactical advantage. But other than that, Ben crushed it. Lighting fire strategically, giving themselves an in and an out, having a way to fall back. They did such an admirable job. So it was almost a documentary in the sense of, this is really happening and we're just watching it unfold, as opposed to us constantly trying to figure out what's going to go wrong, what's going to happen next. And of course they leave us with that bombshell that the young girl's she's infected, oh no, and she's going to get up and be a threat. Nobody has that thought, and they don't loom it over us the whole film. They very much save it towards the end as a big surprise. And because of that, we get to see everything just play out how it's going to play out, and you just get to enjoy how that happens.
Well, maybe I can think of some of my good things before we move on to the things that maybe we didn't like as much. I appreciated the the scene building, I felt like to do an entire movie in just that one home could be challenging, but I appreciated it. To your point of the characters doing things correct, honestly, I felt like a lot of it was simply real. So Judy Barbara being catatonic, whether it's right or wrong, I 100% know that that's real, that's reality, that would happen to people. I'm sure it would happen to me. I have a freeze fear response. Then you have Ben, to your point, who's just the calm one, whose brain is working in overdrive and is going to fight. He in my brain is the fight response. The first time you see him, he's just popping heads. He gets out of the truck, fights his way into the house, no problem. But even Harry, though we know him to be a coward, had they stayed in that cellar the whole time, who could blame them? That's a valid response as well. They were safe. They were barricaded in. Who's to say that that's the wrong thing to do? So I felt like a lot of it was very real.
So can I ask you this? This was your first time seeing the film. I'm assuming you knew going into it that this was kind of the mother of all zombie films.
I mean, I knew that in concept, yes.
Yeah. So overall, what were you expecting this movie to be versus what was it for you?
I have a hard time predicting what a movie is going to be. I really didn't know. I just knew early zombies. So I think I was expecting maybe a little more melodrama. All in all, it was pretty subdued when you think about it. I was thinking a little bit more dramatic, a la like The Birds or Psycho, that kind of, screaming kind of movie. So overall, very subdued. And the fact that it was so concentrated, again, just on this one house and this small group, I think I was expecting a little bit more of them trying to show the widespread effects, but that may be the modern lens that I have, because that's kind of what they try to do, is like, oh, it's so big, look at the scale. But I didn't, if you had asked me to like write a plot, I would have had zero idea of where even to start.
So one thing I want to point out that this film does that you don't really see follow through in other zombie films or similar-esque films, the zombies were capable of using a level of reason.
And tools.
So there were a couple of moments where, one, we find out, okay, they do not like fire. Okay, simple enough.
They don't like light.
The truck was parked out in front of a house, and one of the first things that the zombies do is they basically pick up a large stone and they smash the lights off of the truck.
They bust out the headlights. They don't like them.
Yeah, so every time I think of zombies, I always think of, oh, dumb, they just kind of like lumber through everything, and the only way that they smash anything is because they're trying to get at something and they just kind of throw their body at it. There was whenever they did the remake with John Leguizamo, that was one of the selling points of the movie was, hey, the zombies have learned to use weapons. They booked it really heavy in a lot of the advertisements and the trailers for it, but in the actual film, they actually did very little. They like picked up a gun and then didn't even use it. There's a separate thing that they do in the movie that's more monumental. But in this film, they absolutely use tools. We don't see that carried out anywhere else, and it just puts such a big smile on my face. Like the idea of not only is a zombie coming at me with their teeth and their hands and their strength, but they're going to hit me with a hammer.
Well, it's very interesting because typically when you think or when they try to explain the zombie, because in every zombie media they've got to give like the reasoning, and it's usually coming down to we're back to our base instincts, right? All we want to do is to bite and to eat, and so brain go that it has nothing else. But this is more of like, no, the human was reanimated and still has human thoughts. Maybe not fully, maybe they don't have speech and all of that, but the human thought of like, I know how to, this is my problem and I know how to solve it. The other thing that I thought was so funny and adorable was so the truck explodes, two of our characters die, and the zombies essentially form a little buffet line, and they come up to the front of the line and they reach in and they take their
piece.
They take their tidbit and then they politely move out of the way. They do. They just grab, you know, an arm here, a spleen there, and then they go off and they eat. And you know what? The eating in it, probably because they just gave them some actual food that looked a little icky and filmed them, that got to me more than a modern gore. Like it ooged me out. It was really visceral. Was there anything that you did not like? Any like headcanon things that you would have done differently?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but one of the first thoughts I had is they have effectively a 3-story house. They have the basement, they have the first floor, and they have the second floor. And they definitely do acknowledge the fact that there's a second floor because there's a body up there and he goes up there to grab some stuff. But they basically gave up all of its strategic advantages. So we've already learned that the zombies don't necessarily care for light. They don't really care for fire. At the beginning and throughout the film, there were very few zombies and they just slowly kept accumulating. So we went from like 2 to 6 to 15 to, by the end, there was probably about 100 zombies outside. I felt like there was a really big missed opportunity for them to hunker down on the first floor, bolt everything up, and then go dark. Throughout the film, they leave the lights on. Now, obviously, they're doing that for filming purposes because the cameras back then wouldn't have worked super great in the dark. But if they had just hunkered down, turned off the daggum radio that they had blasting, turn off the lights, and then strategically move up to the second floor and just try to be as quiet as possible and just hide through it. I know in a setting like that, one of the first things I'm going to do is try to shut up. I don't want to draw extra attention. I'm going to turn the lights out. I'm going to block the windows. I'm going to try to be as quiet as I can get away with. I know in their heads, they had this mindset of they wanted to get out and get somewhere else. But quite frankly, being on a random house on a random hill on a countryside, it's a pretty decent little spot to be, as long as you can just avoid drawing attention to yourselves. Ultimately, they fell in that, and it goes downhill from there. But I felt like there was a lot of value to have in the second floor, particularly whenever they get to the point where they're trying to intentionally attack the zombies. They could have tried to lure them to one area of the house and then thrown the Molotovs from the roof. Would have been a really good strategy. They could have led them to one side of the house while they ducked out the other side of the house to get into the truck. There were just a lot of missed opportunities that second floor provided them that they just didn't execute on.
Absolutely. I will give them a little bit of credit in that they find a television set and then are told that they needed to go to a certain place. Like that was where the safety was. They were being told by the government to leave, and that was their motivation for leaving. But you're right. Staying in place is safe. I feel like that might be another theme here, in that trusting in the authorities may not be the best thing to do because the authorities were luring them out of safety. The authorities, by and large, were the ones coming and then shooting the survivors. So there might be a little nugget in there about being a little skeptical about authority or government. The only thing, and I don't think this bugged you at all, the only thing I would have changed is I was highly confused on how long it had been since the outbreak. So what we see is it's evening time when Barbara and Johnny get to the cemetery. And then night falls when they're in the farmhouse. And we do not see daylight again until the end of the movie when Ben is then shot. But they're on the TV in broad daylight with the search party explaining that they've already been out shooting and this and that. I don't believe that search party went through the night, but then there they are at the farmhouse in the day. To my brain, if all they did was give us one round of daytime in the house back to night, and then the next morning, and then the end of the film, that alone would have calmed my brain and helped me understand.
Yeah, I think where we differ on this is the opening scene when the two siblings are venturing out to the cemetery to pay respects to their family member. They allude to they've been driving for a couple of hours, and they were complaining and moaning that they was this many hours this way and it's this many hours back. If I were to break this down with the technology at the time, it's very easy to believe that an outbreak like this could have been going on for many hours before it was understood to be an actual problem or started to make in the radio. Because who wouldn't believe that it was just a psychopath that bit somebody or killed someone? Yeah, exactly. So, just throwing a crazy number out there, like let's say 6 hours goes by just completely unregistered by anybody of significance that there's an outbreak occurring. Then you get to the point where it starts getting word that, hey, something is up, and the hospitals are now understanding that something's going on. Maybe tack on another 2 hours from that. And by the time you actually get to an alert point, you're now 8 hours in. And maybe it is only a handful of people, and maybe it's isolated to one city. So if it's isolated to one city, how hard of a struggle is it to then get it to be a nationwide broadcast? Or they allude to they've got the White House or the government involved in it. That's going to take some time and credibility, because the government's not going to want to lean into complete hysteria. By the way, the dead are coming back. I think that would rile some people up. So they're going to have reluctance on actually agreeing to put a message out. So they're going to have to send people to vet it for themselves before they finally react. So I think it's reasonable to say 8 to 12 hours could have passed, even if the outbreak had started somewhat aggressively. So combine that with maybe unlucky timing of they were getting ready to leave their house. They weren't really looking or listening to the radio because they were doing other things. They hop in the car. They're now driving out, and they're not listening to the radio at all. It's turned off whenever we're with them. And then they're driving for another 3-4 hours to get to where they're going. Okay, well, fine. 11 to 15 hours roughly has transpired. I can believe a world where all of that has happened in just unfortunate timing of when they got in the car and the fact they weren't listening to the radio.
I can believe all of that. And that's why I just say, for my brain, I would not even be asking this question if you showed me one more day-night cycle. But because you didn't, now we're having to go through and and try to timeline this out. So that was my only complaint. Funny things that you might have noticed. I have a couple. Do you have any?
Funny for the wrong reasons. I don't know that I have funny in the sense of what you're looking for, but I was just waiting for that little girl to just rip through them. I was so ready for it. And ultimately the opening siblings, the brother who, spoiler, he ends up getting overtaken, or he hits his head on the cemetery stone during the scuffle, and he does die. Ultimately he ends up coming back.
He snatches his sister out of that house.
Yeah, so that was funny to me, but those are the only two real moments. Me looking forward to the little girl just eating everybody up for the wrong reasons. I thought that was hysterical. And then the brother eventually coming back and grabbing her out.
Okay, but speaking of tools, when the little girl does come back to life, what does she do?
I don't know.
She stabs her mother with like a garden trowel.
Nice.
She doesn't bite. She's not like, oh, yum. She just grabs a weapon and starts stabbing. It was just so funny. So old-timey movie, things aren't going to be perfect. We're looking at it with a critical modern eye. But what made me giggle was, you alluded to, there was a dead body upstairs whenever they first got into the house. And when you see it, it's gruesome. It's like someone has eaten the face off of it and it's dripping. There's blood everywhere. Oh my God. So then a little bit later, he needs to search upstairs. And so he leaves everyone downstairs. He makes his way upstairs and he needs to move the body. And he is just sliding it across the hallway and into a room. And you just see a perfect, beautiful, whole human face of the person as he drags her across.
Yeah, after they had shown us this like Play-Doh putty, completely deformed skull a couple of minutes prior.
Oh, that really made me laugh. And then just bringing it back to the eating, I was giggling earlier about it, that they're just in their cafeteria line and pleasantly picking up their piece of human flesh to consume is really silly. But you know what? For a film this old, I think you didn't particularly like the combat, but I thought the combat in it was fine. Maybe a little cheesy in the way that they had to do the practical effects, very WWE. I'm going to be hitting this point that is very obviously not the head of this person, but we're just going to believe it. But for a movie that old, I was overall very, very, very pleased.
We did forget about the truck. When they ignited, it went from being this kind of dull action scene to all of a sudden the camera cuts, there's an edit, and the truck's just sitting out in this field and goes whoa, up in flames.
Just
there was
Inferno.
No real transition.
Inferno. But then the people inside were not fully barbecued. They were just lightly toasted, because then when the zombies came to get their bites, that was still real juicy.
Yeah, they were cooked to order.
They were. Okay, so ratings. You have some ratings for us to go through.
I do. So obviously this isn't top tier modern stuff. So I want to be a little bit generous given the technology that they had available at the times, given the way that everything was going to be perceived, because this was a big first time that they were doing it. I want to be friendly to these scores and not compare it against a movie that came out last year. So overall, out of 5.
Out of 5.
5 Scary Movie Sundays out of 5. How scary was this movie? If you had watched it in 1968.
Oh, it's hard for me to put myself in that brain. Because again, I have been tormenting myself with horror my whole life. So though when I was younger, I would get really scared of things, it's hard to scare me nowadays.
But this didn't exist back then.
It didn't exist. Overall, scary. You know what? I'm going to give it a 3.
Yeah, I was going to say 3 myself.
Yeah, because I'm picturing, the moments. There are a few where, like one of the characters walked too close to a window, and though it was boarded up, a hand just snatched in there and grabbed a hold. Like that. There are moments like that were frightening.
How gory would you say this was out of 5?
It wasn't super gory, but the gore that was there, like I said, really, really icked me. I'll give it a 2.
Okay. I was going to give it a 3, actually. And the main reason for that was, again, going back to what they had available to them at the time, and the fact that they showed the undead stopping what they were doing and munching down on them, and just the blood and the meat and
intestines, man.
You said it earlier, but even though you had seen far, far worse, there was something so unnerving about it, and how casual it was and how a matter of fact it was. They were eating that man. We were watching a man get eaten, and the overall effect in total bumped it up. Now, was the entire movie a gore fest? Absolutely not even close. It's one of the most plain Jane dull affairs ever. However, that one scene and what it brought to the table and how they brought it to the table, it gave me a bigger reaction than most gore fests would.
True. It's very true.
I give it a 3. How unique was this film?
You have to give it a 5. You have to, because there was nothing like this. Now, if you compare it to the whole zombie genre, of course it's not unique. But at the time, goodness.
Yeah, this is probably the only zombie film that will ever get a high score for being unique.
That's true.
But George A. Romero brought something to the table that no one else had even really considered. And you have to think about the other types of films that were going on, and this is post Cold War. A lot of radioactive monsters was the main theme and the main draw, and doomsday and apocalypse, but most of them centered around either just radioactive monsters or man-made threats. This one, well, technically it is man-made, in a sense of it's men coming back. Nobody had been looking at it from this direction, so the theme of it allowed them to completely depart from the paranormal, the supernatural.
They did kind of try to make it an alien thing, though.
What do you mean?
They tied it when they were in DC and trying to talk to the politicians. They tied it to having recently been to the moon, and that potentially bringing that radiation back onto Earth had brought the dead to life.
You're right. They did try to justify it.
They did.
Oh, we missed that one. We should have talked about that for a bit. But yeah, that was an interesting moment because again, post Cold, we're in the Cold War kind of territory, and the race to the moon,
the space
and
race,
the consequences that can come from that. Like perfect timing.
Yeah.
And honestly, really clever.
Yeah.
So how much would you say this film's played by the rules?
I feel like they never surprised me. So to the point of they can use tools, because we saw that they always use tools from the beginning to the end. They did not like light from the beginning to the end. I guess the only thing is they seem okay in sunshine.
Yeah.
I would have liked them to like cower maybe or seek out darkness. So for that reason alone, I think I'll give it a 4.
4. I'm going to give it a 5 because I really struggle to find anything where they completely broke down. They were consistently afraid of fire throughout the film. They couldn't do anything superhuman. Overall, they just quote unquote lost through the threat of sheer numbers. And I think that's inevitable.
And infighting.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to give it a 5 because I don't feel like there was ever a moment where I went, no, come on, you got to be kidding me.
True.
How would you rate the story?
I'm going to give it a 4. Because it really stuck with me. I love a story, not that I'd want or need a twist, but I love a story where at the end, I need to talk about it. And my God, did I need to talk about this movie. And in fact, I think both of us did. And I was driving us crazy because I was saying, stop, we need to save our thoughts for the podcast. But I love a story that sticks. And I appreciated all of the nuance that we've been discussing. So the ghouls versus the humans and the different responses to emergencies, and then the undertones of racism. I really enjoyed it.
I'm going to deviate a lot. I'm going to give it a 2. And the main reason for that is there was so much opportunity to really, really lay into the internal dynamics amongst the group. And with the one lady being completely catatonic and unresponsive, she effectively was not going to have a conflict amongst the group. She has kind of an outburst at one point, but other than that, she's useless. The women might as well be written off of the show. They didn't really add a true sense of value to the conflict. This was basically the story of the 3 men, I thought. The young man, the old man, and the black man. And ultimately, they were so true to their characters that they didn't really provide a lot of nuance and a lot of ebb and flow amongst each other. It was very, no pun intended, black and white. The coward was going to be the coward. Ben was going to be the proactive guy, and the young guy was just looking for someone to lead him. And I never really saw character development. So during this period, they've done a lot of films that show storytelling. This isn't a new concept to them. But not a single one of the characters changed over time. They didn't advance themselves. They were always the exact same character you saw at the beginning. And ultimately, they were only in the one house, and they were only stepped outside really one time to try and make a run for the fuel station, but other than that, not much of nothing.
You know what, though? I could make an argument, just for funsies, that is the point. When you look at a zombie movie, and like you were saying, the whole point of the zombies is the overwhelming numbers. It's not that one is necessarily going to be a problem, except for maybe in the beginning when you've got a young woman being attacked by a very large man. But the overwhelming numbers, the relentless forward motion, they are always coming for you. They are always gathering. And no matter what you do, this is coming for you. That might have been the point. Ben was, we've already said, what was he supposed to do differently? He did everything correctly. He saw dangers inside and outside. He did not hesitate when he realized that Harry was willing to let him die. He shot him first. He was not going to deal with that. I feel like what more could I have asked of him as a human, as a person? But what does it come to? This is relentless. And it's coming no matter what. That might have been the point. How depressing.
How would you rate the acting?
This is a hard one because you've got to look at it in the context of movies at that time. I do not particularly enjoy acting from movies like the beginning of cinema. I am spoiled to modern acting, the more realistic acting, as opposed to acting of the time, which was not realistic purposefully. They weren't trying to look like you would look in that situation. But I can't very easily look past that. I'm going to give it a 3.
I'm going to give it a 2. Again, I think this comes back to the lack of nuance. Overall, the script was very straightforward. The characters just didn't do a whole lot. The main people that were showing emotion were the coward and the catatonic lady. Again, the women are almost a write-off of, they didn't have a big fluctuation. They were just kind of scoping everything out. They were constantly observing everything and trying to play in an emotional support role. And Ben is the one exception to this.
Yeah.
I thought he was 10 out of 10. Absolutely amazing. And he carried that entire film on his back, much like he carried all of the survivors on his back. But ultimately, I don't think there was a lot to be shown for here. And the lack of nuance really hurts. So Ben's the only reason why it's getting as high of a score of a 2 as it is.
I would say, to your point, every movie is going to have a range of the acting ability. And this one actually, I think, has a wider range than many. And I could put it down to, I think her name was Judy, the young woman, was probably the worst for me. I would give her, a 0 if I could. But then, like you said, Ben is a 5. So I'm averaging out there.
Okay. Directing?
4.
4.
They shocked me in multiple ways. And you'd think that because everything is built off of this model that I wouldn't be shocked, but I was.
I'm going to give it a 3, and some of that score may reflect the fact that I don't understand the challenges that they had at the time, but there were several instances where they were cutting scenes and the edits were just so shocking. Good examples being when the truck was set on fire and when we saw the dead body upstairs and how it went from this like clay putty to now when we're dragging it, it's just an actress with her head, a normal head, no big deal. And
they could have solved that so easily by just put a sack on her, like have Ben, cover her out of respect and then drag her. It's so funny to me.
Yeah, so I'm going to put that squarely on the director and say it's their issue to work out. I'm also going to lump in George A. Romero on this one and say it got as high of a score as it did because of how novel the idea was and how practical everybody's reactions to everything was. So I consider 3 a high score considering the downsides. Another
really funny moment when you're thinking about those directing cuts is in some of the big zombie group moments. You see this wide shot, they take 3 to 4 steps towards the camera, and then it turns, you know, to look at a different character, and then it goes back to the wide shot, and it literally repeats. They've gone back and they take those same 4 steps forward. It's so funny. Look for those.
How would you rate the overall effects?
I'm going to go with a 3, and I'm averaging here from what we've talked about now ad nauseum, which is them taking their little bits of flesh, having their munchies, which was amazing, 5 out of 5. But then you pair it with some of the fight scenes, the fight sequences that I did not particularly like. So we'll average out.
Yeah, I'm going to match you. I'm going to give it a 3. I thought they did decent enough with how they were boarding things up, how they had to handle the fight scenarios. They did like the truck on fire, so that's real. It's hard, you know, they can't get a score against them for that. Again, limited by the times, and overall, it didn't take me out of it other than just maybe a giggle along the way. But they definitely had to lose points for that human skull. Overall, totally encompassing. What's your overall final score?
I'm glancing at all my little pieces, and fighting myself between wanting to literally average those out and be like, well, that must be my score, or say what I want to say. I'm gonna do what I've been trying not to do and give it a point, so 3.5. I'm hovering between that 3 and the 4. Because there are a lot of challenges to it, and especially if people aren't fans of older cinema, then this will be a challenge. But it's one of those that I fully understand why everyone talks so highly of it, why it spawned the genre that it did. I think it is. I think everyone should go and watch it. I'm sad that I waited so long.
I'm going to give it a 3 just because the idea was so novel. It's so creative. It set the entire genre forward. But ultimately, it was a lot of the same things all throughout the movie. They didn't really do a lot of diversity in it. They're, again, say the same word, lack of nuances through it. I feel like there was missed opportunities to do more, and they could have blown the roof off. However, the ultimate thread that they leave you to fill in the gaps for yourself and decide if that's what actually happened of, hey, we had the cavalry come in and basically take down a black man. And the themes that are invoked from that is fan fiction to me. I feel like they left that for you to decide if that's actually what happened or not. So it's hard for me to wrap it in as firm that was the thread through the entire movie. And if it was intended to be the thread through the whole movie, I think they did a weak job of setting the dynamic between the 3 men of why are they not going to listen to them. They could have added some extra undertones of racism to go alongside that. I'm not going to follow you. You're just whatever, right? So I'm going to leave that out and just say the movie as a whole without that thread running through it, 3. And most of that comes from the novel idea and the fact that they didn't do anything completely stupid.
All right. Well, I think that sums it up.
That would be the first ever Scary Movie Sunday. How do you feel?
Sunday. That was fun. I feel like we tend to have a lot of these conversations already. So getting a little bit of structure to it, and hopefully getting some people in the comments chiming in, giving us recommendations. I'm real happy. How about you?
Pretty good. Just a little back lore. Just as you said, we constantly watch these films. We immediately turn around and we break it down and we start talking to each other about what did we love, what did we hate, what would we have done different, what did it remind us of. One of our absolute favorite things to do is to go and try to immediately hunt down lore videos and find out, is there a deeper meaning to this? Now, obviously, this film's a little bit more ham-fisted and straightforward in what it's trying to achieve, but we go on for days hunting and pecking and just trying to find extra value through this. So we're already doing it, and the fact that we're just taking the time to sit down and just record it, it's just a fun little piece to share. Who cares if it goes anywhere? It's just for fun. But I just like being able to share that, and also having somebody else be able to chime in and come back and say, hey, you missed this. Did you notice this? Or this happened because this happened. And just point out all those observations that we've overlooked. Maybe there is a justification for something that we missed. That's probably the piece I'm most excited to get back. An extra link that we didn't perceive or we didn't learn about, or maybe even a reference to somebody else's content that we can go take a look at. That I'm really excited to be able to see where that goes.
Absolutely. Well,
So-
thanks for joining us.
Yeah, if you survived this long, I'd like to thank you. It was the first one ever. Probably a little rough, but no big deal. Just having some fun with it. If you did make it this far, if you're interested in just checking out the entire genre of horror, gore, scary, not scary, what have you, if you enjoy Scary Movie Sunday, go ahead and give us a like. If you drop us a subscription, we're going to keep doing this. We're going to have some fun with it. Obviously, we'll probably get a little bit better over time, but that's fun. What's the next on our list?
We found on the Netflix a movie called Talk to Me, and it's about to leave the Netflix. So we're going to go and make that our next Scary Movie Sunday.
All right. Catch you next time. Thanks, everyone.